This is Towards Understanding. You're with Clayton Bjelland, and it is absolutely wonderful to be able to have a chat to the CEO of Baptist World Aid. Melissa Lipsett joins me right now. How are you, Melissa?
I'm good. Thank you, Clayton. Great to talk to you too.
It's wonderful to be able to have a chat to you. You've led a remarkable life. You lead an incredible organisation. You have so much creativity about how you are trying to engage with people. So looking forward to having this conversation with you. Can we go back a little bit to sort of the founding stages of what it meant for you to have a faith and have an understanding of trusting Jesus in your life? Was that something sort of growing up in a family environment? Was that something that happened a bit later in your world?
Yeah, no, for me it was later, Clayton. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I grew up in country Victoria, and I pretty much ran away from home as a teenager. Home was a fairly difficult environment, and for a number of reasons. And the Navy came to town, and I took that bus out of there. And it was when I was in the Navy that a Navy chaplain opened the pages of the Bible to me, and he showed me that I wasn't who I thought I was. I didn't have a very good opinion of myself, and he said, no, that's not who you are. You are who God says you are. And that blew my mind, Clayton. And it, I resolved to follow Jesus that day, if that's what he really thought about me. And I've tried to follow him every day since.
Do you remember the moments of what it was that, he was saying, this is what God thinks of you?
It was a collection of things rather than just the one verse or anything like that. It was a conversation that was, across a period of time. And I guess as that chaplain and I, developed a trust between each other, he was really getting to the heart of the matter for me, which was about my identity. It was about, who I believed I was. And as I said, I didn't have a very high opinion of myself. I carried a lot of shame and guilt. And as I say, I'd come from that difficult family environment. Yeah. So I was quite troubled. And so, there was a whole variety of factors at play there. And through the pages of the Bible, he was able to show me that God was an incredibly loving God who loved me exactly as I was, but he did want to lift me out of a pit and put my feet on solid ground and put a new song in my mouth. And that's what happened. I chose to believe that was the case, to put my trust in that. And certainly as I look back over my life, I'm astounded at what God has done. And, I realize that God doesn't waste anything. Yeah. He didn't waste any of those formative years either, even though they were very difficult years. And in many ways, that they have shaped the person that I am today. It's just that God has, made beauty out of ashes. Nice. And it's really quite remarkable for me as I look back. I do say to, young people in particular when I'm talking to them, if God can do what he's done with my life, he can do anything with yours, because really my story should be different to what it is.
I love that. The realization, and I think we sometimes don't necessarily look back at our lives enough to realize those differences and what God plays in that life as well.
A real sense of him not wasting anything, and each opportunity and experience leading into the next. So, my career has been quite diverse, but it's been beautifully brought together as you look back over that time.
I did want to sort of push into that actually a little bit as well, because here it was in the Navy that you had this moment of understanding of your true identity, before what God says of you, and that then has shaped the rest of your life. But I believe it was also during this time where sort of those leadership opportunities and the abilities to sort of start honing and crafting that also commenced. Was that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't understand what leadership was at all. And in fact, when I ran away to join the Navy, I asked to be a cook. And after the various testing that they put you through, they said, no, we're going to send you to officer training school. Wow. We're going to train you to be a leader, essentially. And so they identified something in me that I didn't understand, but also, there was a system of training, a very good system of training to develop and hone those leadership skills. So whilst those skills have changed over the years, or the posture of those has changed over the years, they're much more pastoral now than they were. I would say that I'm, a much more servant-hearted leader than I was in the military, which is a much more authoritarian leadership structure. But there's no question that hasn't gone to waste. It's been incredibly important in my leadership journey. Yeah. So I'm very, very grateful to the military for that early training.
How many years were you actually in the military there?
Goodness me, I'd have to go back in my memory, but I was a permanent member as well as a reserve member after I had small children for about 15 years.
Yeah, wow. It's incredible service. I know that you've also hold, a Bachelor of Ministry, a Bachelor of Applied Science, a whole lot of various, qualifications too. How did it shape out that you sort of went from military, and you mentioned, young children, so you're part of what it means to be a family environment, to actually sort of start this journey into leading and working with humanitarian aid and development, because that's been a big part of your world as well. Was that sort of the timeline that I've described, or was it a bit different and sort of back and forth?
Yeah, well, I did, as we've talked about 15 years in the military, and I did step away because my husband and I were both in the Navy, and that made family life very complicated. He was seagoing, and so would often be deployed for long periods of time. And, if the children and I were living in a different part of the world to that which he was coming back to, we didn't see each other very often. The kids didn't see their dad very often. So we decided quite early on in that journey that one of us needed to step away from the military, and it made sense at that time for that to be me. But if I wind back just a little bit before that time, when I became a Christian, I was just about to get married, and so I came home to my then fiancé and said, I've become a Christian, you'll have to become one too. I said it very, very pragmatically, and he was understandably, quite shocked, quite surprised, didn't understand what that meant. Actually, he was at deployment on the time, so it was when he came back from deployment that I greeted him with that news. Yes. But he was very open, in fact, and so he started attending church with me, and God was very good. He also became a Christian within about a 6-month period, and so we both were new Christians. So in that military time, we sought to bury ourselves, or not bury ourselves, plant ourselves in whatever local church, felt right at the time. And we moved a lot in those days. We moved, we had umpteen addresses in less than 10 years. So, there was always a different local church to plant ourselves in. So we became very adept at joining the local church. So when the time came for the decision for me to step away, it was really important for us to plant ourselves somewhere more permanently. So, we moved, we found a permanent place to call home, and that meant finding a permanent church to call home. And so it was in that journey of finding that local church that there was a call for me into a more fulsome ministry within the life of the local church. And I guess I fell into that initially, but I ended up serving in and leading in the local church for nearly 20 years. And it was only after the end of that time that I stepped further into what I would call international mission through both Bible Society Australia and now Baptist World Aid Australia.
And so it's during each of these times that you sort of even when you weren't necessarily looking for that leadership role, it seemed like you always were in those moments as well, and that was clearly part of that call on your life in that sense as well. So this has been part of what the journey has sort of taken you there. We're going to spend a lot of our sort of the second part of our conversation talking about your leading in Baptist World Aid and a lot of the various things that are occurring under your leadership in that organisation. But just before we get there, can we talk a bit about the heart for that sort of international humanitarian and generally the heart for those who are perhaps not in the place of blessing in that others may be sort of in material senses. Where did that come from? Was that back to sort of the childhood? Was it part of what your church work was? Where does that deep, because I mean, it's just, anytime I've talked to you, it's just it is a deep part of you that is so passionate about that, Melissa.
Yeah, and I think it's all of those things, Clayton. I was a product of mission, so I've always been passionate about mission. And when I say mission, I mean integral mission. So that's about fullness of life for people, and fullness of life is, yes, understanding who Jesus is and loving Jesus, but it's also about fullness of life in terms of our circumstances. So that means opportunity and provision, and these being not, God isn't a God of scarcity. He has provided. He has sought to provide through creation fullness for people. And so for me, integral mission is not just about people knowing that Jesus loves them, but is also about them having, adequate. It's about them having enough to flourish, just like I have the opportunity to do. And so that's about opportunity, the provision of resource, those sorts of things. So I've always been very passionate about, integral mission. And I think that is a product of what I stepped out of in my earliest life, but also then, my faith journey, taught me about biblical justice, really. And so, yes, through 20 years in the local church, we were very engaged in both local and international mission through the local church. And we built a very large portfolio of coming alongside vulnerable communities in various different ways around the world. And so that was my first foray, if you like, into international development. I've learnt much, much more about that since, but certainly it was developed through that time, yes.
And maybe not wanting to stretch the story too much, but it does feel like there's an aspect that, back to your discovery of identity, the ability to allow others to discover their true identity in Jesus, and that comes with actually caring for the person, not just being told about this Jesus guy.
That's exactly right. There's, how can somebody really understand the goodness of Jesus, the goodness of God, if they're living in an incredibly marginalised situation that could be addressed by the shifting of resource, by the shifting of opportunity, by the shifting of power, all of those sorts of things, which is what God intended at the start. Creation started wonderfully, beautifully, exactly as God intended, and then, of course, was hideously disrupted by sin. And so God is redeeming the world to himself, but it's through the actions of Christians, of the church. He calls people to partner in that restoration of his creation. And that's, we have that responsibility, but also incredible privilege to do that.
The CEO of Baptist World Aid Australia, Melissa Lipsett, is my guest. We're going to be back talking a bit more specifically around the work that Baptist World Aid is doing and some of the unique areas that they are involved in. That's on the way next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielan. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Melissa, maybe let's sort of briefly have that conversation around the core. I've tried to give a bit of a crack at the core of what Baptist World Aid is. You would do it much better, of course. What is the heart of Baptist World Aid and what you're trying to achieve?
It's about joining with God in His work in the world in bringing fullness of life for all people. And so obviously we go where the need is the greatest. And so for us, that's in community development in marginalised places around the world. And it's also about responding to humanitarian disaster or crisis. And that might be things like conflict and people being displaced, or it might be in response to an earthquake and people being in great need because of that disaster.
I know one of the things that you've done around that sort of community development part is lots of organisations have child sponsorship and these sorts of things, and I know Baptist World Aid has as well. And recently you've actually sort of tweaked a little bit about the way, I suppose we might call it, how you market that. Could you talk to us a bit about what you did and why that's the case?
Yeah, sure. Well, we've been involved in child sponsorship for over 50 years, and one of the values of our organisation is that we're a learning organisation, that we want to be learners, and we say that when we learn something, when we know better, we do better. And so I think there was a traditional child sponsorship model originally, which was quite a transactional relationship between one sponsor and one child. But across the course of the years, we've shifted our programming model so that we place children and young people at the centre of their community, and they're helping to lead the change within their communities. But it's also meant, as a part of that we listen very deeply to those children and young people and their families and communities. And in this last period of time, they've said to us, quite understandably, that their dignity, their privacy, their security is incredibly important to them, as it is to us, and that they would like us to heighten that. And so we've chosen to cover the faces of children in our sponsorship programs so that people can't access their image either online or at physical events. And that's a very big marketing move. It made our marketing people feel quite anxious, but we knew it was the right thing to do. Unfortunately, our world has changed, and we hear every day, sadly, about the abuse of children's images online, and so these children are amongst the most vulnerable in our world. So as we would seek to protect our own children, we absolutely should be seeking to protect these more marginalised children and young people. So we've done that. There is a facilitated relationship, but increasingly that relationship is about the community that the child is a part of, rather than it being a one-on-one transactional relationship.
I know that the way also Baptist World Aid works is it does, as you sort of designed sort of connect to community. That's sort of the idea. Like, this is that idea. How would we hear back from community? And it's not always about sort of Baptist Word Aid itself sort of being the hero in inverted commas, if we want to say that. It's also about connecting with those who are on the ground and facilitating what they're doing and that good work. That's a part of it. I'd imagine that's a little bit hard to manage, though. Sometimes it's easy to just be controlling all of it yourself. How do you go about sort of managing those connections constantly?
Well, it is the core of who we are, so it's a non-negotiable for us. We are never the experts. We're never the heroes. We have this incredible privilege to partner in local community, and we truly believe that every person in that local community, no matter how vulnerable or marginalised it is made in the image of God. So they are smart and they're creative and they're resilient. They're hardworking, and so much of this is about opportunity for them to be able to display those things. And so we come alongside local community, and we listen very, very deeply. We help them to identify their strengths and the resources that are already in that community, and then it's a matter of helping them to leverage those. We would never go into a community suggesting that we know what they need, we know what they should do. It is very much about coming alongside and shifting power and resource to give them the opportunity to do that for themselves. So we work very, very locally through a local Christian partner who then, sits for quite a long time with local communities. I keep saying the word local because that's so important. Again, a local Christian partner who works with a local community knows the context so much better than we do. So we're a facilitator, a monitorer, a project partner, but our local partners and the people in community themselves are very much the operatives in this work. They're the heroes. Yeah. So it's just so critical to who we are that it's a total non-negotiable. So whether it just makes sense to do it that way. Sadly, the church has a history of participating in other models which have relatively poor outcomes. We know that this works, and we totally understand why that works, and that is about people being smart and resilient and creative and knowing knowing the context and knowing the answers themselves, and simply needing that opportunity and the shifting of resource and power.
You talked about the fact that Baptist World Aid is involved in that community development in disaster relief and helping where they may be. I think there's one other aspect which I know I certainly have heard a lot, and I think Baptist World Aid have done very well. So often agencies don't necessarily do advocacy well internally into their own countries. But I think Baptist World Aid, done that with the fashion guides and these sorts of things, with different ways that you've actually measured and looked at various aspects of that. That does seem to be a big part, that it's actually advocacy back into, Australia, as Baptist World Aid Australia is talking into that. Is that a big heartbeat, Wyatt? And could you perhaps tell us a few of those things that you think are flying really well?
Yeah, well, we think of our world as being very big and the choices that we make as not affecting anybody else, but that's just not true. Our world is actually quite small, and when I take or use too much, somebody else suffers. And so we do think advocacy is a very important way that we can address this. And, Baptist World Aid is quite small, but as we, partner with other people, individuals and other organisations, we can make a significant difference as we all raise our voices. And yes, a classic example of that is the ethical fashion guide, the ethical fashion report. And that basically says, that there is this long supply chain from us to where our garments are produced. And most of us are not very knowledgeable about that long supply chain, but basically if we don't, if we aren't very careful about that, we end up with the people along that chain and those at the very end of that chain not receiving a fair living wage, for instance, not working under conditions that you and I would consider were reasonable, and damage to the planet in terms of what might be the use of resources along that chain. So we speak to. We do the research around how our clothes are ethically resourced or otherwise, ethically sourced or otherwise. And as we inform consumers about that, we invite them to raise their voices and speak to the companies that they're buying from. And so the Ethical Fashion Report is over a decade old now. And across that time, we've seen some significant shifts. Now, there's a long way to go, I have to tell you, but there is no question that as Australians have together raised their voices to the places, the brands that they choose to buy, that those brands have, many of those brands have shifted the way they use resources and what the structures they put in place to ensure that people in that supply chain do indeed receive fair conditions under which to work and a living wage. And I think that the average Australian would be prepared to make different choices about their clothing. This affects all of us. We all wear clothing. If we knew the truth about those supply chains. So that's the premise there. And we know that many voices raised together makes a difference. And that's an opportunity that every single one of us can participate in around, a better world. For the people who are making our garments.
I know, certainly I've been out at the shops and before I go and buy something, I'm like, I'm just going to look this up. And, there's some that I got, right, I will purchase from here. There's other shops I'm like, no, I'm not going there. I'm going to go and try and find something else. And I think
That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's a simple way to make sure that we are actually playing our part. And it is one of those opportunities. So I've thoroughly appreciated that guide for many, many years. This advocacy is a big part of it. I know for you also, Melissa, you are such a remarkable leader in this space in Australia and indeed around the world as well. And one of your hearts and passions is for women's voices to be heard more and more. We know, well, perhaps we don't all know, but if you have those conversations, there's very clear evidence in the actual work of humanitarian aid that if you tend to support, say, a mother in a situation versus even a father, that it will bring the community up. I think this is true in sort of advocacy spaces as well. Would you talk to us about your heart for that, and I suppose how we can also help our culture? We've been based on a very patriarchal society for literally thousands of years. So how do we have these conversations better? How do we make sure that this is actually something that is not sort of spoken of as desirable, but is what life is?
Yeah, thank you. This is something that I'm really passionate about, and it comes out of both a spiritual place but also a practical space. If I deal with the practical space first, we know that in developing countries where women are not empowered, where women don't have control over their resources, where women and girls are discriminated against, none of those countries have reached their development goals. The evidence is very clear that when we enable women to participate in family decision-making, community decision-making, when they're able to decide how their own resources are used, and that includes their own labour, that not just they benefit, but their children do, the whole community does, the nation does, all boats rise. And so it makes sense to empower women alongside men. Now, if I then look at the spiritual basis for this, God's very first words to humans were that they were both made equally in his image. Men and women equal alongside each other. And so I find it deeply tragic that the church should be leading this conversation about equality, but sadly we've fallen so far behind that we're now irrelevant to the conversation. And I think that's, one of the greatest tragedies of the church, across this period of time. I deeply lament that. I'm convinced that God deeply laments that. I don't think I'm convinced that it serves no purpose other than to perpetuate unhelpful power imbalances. And I guess I've got to a stage in my life and career and ministry where it's become, I have to speak out about it as graciously as possible, but as strongly as I dare, because I think it's too important not to. I thought it would shift across my lifetime. I'm not seeing that shift in and through the church and church-based structures. So I don't think that serves, I don't think that honours people. I don't think it honours God. And, I want to see that change. So yes, I do speak out about that.
Melissa, and maybe this is too, I'm sure it's too simplistic, this thought, but is the best way forward something which is saying, well, let's make sure we have more women in leadership positions in these conversations, or is it to focus on the idea of creating the platform for people to step into, as it were? If you sort of follow the idea, is it a bit of both? What's the best thing we should be doing, I suppose, within our, at least starting with our Christian communities?
Yeah, it is both. It's very hard to raise women up in male-dominated environments unless we're very intentional about that, and we're very intentional about the shifts that have to be made. There's so many barriers that prevent women from moving, ahead in leadership, and their external barriers, they include practical things like, a lack of childcare, or a lack of mentors or sponsors, a lack of networking circles where women feel comfortable, a lack of role models. But they also include barriers that are cultural biases and prejudices. And, when we're talking about the church, we've got some additional specific faith-based cultural barriers there that I don't think are legitimate, but they are entirely there. So we have to deal with those, and we can only do that, structurally. And but there are also some things that women can do, but it's been, it's quite difficult to do that. Speaking about gender is hard. I recently stood up to speak about this at a conference, and they had asked me to speak about it. I was a welcome guest in that space, but when I looked out across the across the audience, I realised it was 75% men, and I felt quite anxious because talking about gender is hard. It can be quite hostile. And so, it was an incredibly respectful room, and they were very engaged in what it is that organisations can do and how they could support women to take these steps forward into positions of leadership. It's a tough conversation. It's quite confronting because the reality is that for women to there is only so much space. We talk about space around the table, but at any table there's only so much space. So somebody's going to have to step away to genuinely make space, and overwhelmingly that's going to need to be a man who steps away. So telling men that's that's quite a confronting conversation for them. And I always say that, I've been given opportunities, and overwhelmingly those opportunities have been given to me by men. I've been championed by men. I'm incredibly grateful for that. But still in all, I'm a rare case. That's what the numbers say, that if we look at the sheer statistics of the number of women who are leading in organisations in this country, both as CEOs and as board chairs, the numbers are very low. For board chairs underneath 20%, for CEOs somewhere around about 30%. In Christian organisations, the numbers are even worse than that. So, clearly there's a problem, and we need to address it.
Melissa, thank you for the conversation on that specifically. I think it's something that we need to continue having. We need to continue having these conversations, but then creating the actions that come out of those as well. And so thank you for voicing it. Thank you for continuing to voice it. Please do as well. And thank you overall, as we do wrap up our conversation, for the work that you are doing in leading Baptist World Aid, the conversations and the sharing of your story as well. It's been a privilege to be able to hear it today. Thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure, Clayton.
Melissa Lipsett, she's the CEO of Baptist World Aid, joining me on Towards Understanding.